One of the things in selecting and setting up a country home site is the source of water. It's very important in your considerations of all of the needs in a country setting to consider the water source. Many people have wells, and of course it requires a pump to pump water out of a well. This can be done with a hand pump or some other mechanical type of pump. But the ideal thing is to be able to have a spring. And if there is a spring that is up high enough above your home site or the place where the house is to be able to run the water downhill, then you have gravity-fed water in your home. This allows gravity to pull the water downhill and give you water pressure without requiring any energy or mechanized means of creating the water pressure. When you perhaps are looking for a suitable spring, you can identify where springs occur by seeing the little streams of water flowing over the ground, perhaps feeding a creek, a place where it's marshy or wet up on a hillside. Sometimes will be the characteristic that you see that indicates a spring is there. If you find some wet place or little rivulet flowing over the ground, then you can trace it back to the place where you first see the wetness or moisture and start digging into the ground. Yesterday when we dug this spring out, we had to clear the weeds off and dig along the ditch, trace the spring to its source, and then dig out a basin. We put in gravel and a collection pipe. Then we put in more gravel, we closed it back over with plastic, then we put dirt on top, and now as you can see it's all covered over. When we get grass planted on this and growing, there will not even be any evidence that there's a spring under the ground there, and it will be protected from runoff and from contamination. I have had the opportunity through the past 20 years or so to put in at least 10 springs or head up 10 springs with this kind of a method, and there has never been any problem in any of those springs so far. I believe that this is a very reliable way to head up a spring, help to keep out contamination, and to allow collection of the vein of water and to keep it channeled where you can use it. In this spring here, we've measured the water and we have evaluated how much is coming out in 1 minute. We had about 1 5/8 cups of water coming out per minute. That calculates to be about 147 to 150 gallons in one 24-hour period, or a little over 1,000 gallons in 1 week. That's a sufficient amount to meet all the domestic needs of a couple, or being careful, even 3 people. So even a small spring like this, running continuously with a reservoir to collect the water and hold it for you, would be adequate to meet the water needs for a couple. One thing you might wonder is, how can you make sure that your water in a spring is going to be reliable, that it won't dry up or diminish when it gets dry? It's important to check that possibility, because sometimes when there is a lot of rain, there are places where springs appear, wet weather springs, and then after several days of dry weather, the springs will dry up and there's no more water running again until there are heavy rains. One way to check the reliability of a spring is to see how the water's running when you have had rainy weather, and then wait until there's a dry spell. When there's been a couple weeks of dry weather, or even longer, in the middle of the summer or in the fall after a long dry spell, see how much water is running from the spring. If the spring has dried up, then that's evidence that's not a reliable spring. You need to check for another one that runs year-round. Another thing that you can do is to ask some of the old-timers in the area if there are neighbors who have lived there all of their life or for many, many years. They usually know where the springs are that have a reputation for running year-round. So it's a good idea to check with them and ask what their knowledge is about a spring that you may have been looking at, or if they know of a spring on the property that you're looking at that is known to be reliable and run year-round. Usually the springs that run when there's been a long drought gain a reputation in the neighborhoods, so it's good to check on those things. It is advisable when everything's finished and set up and the water has had a chance to flush out your spring and pipe system to get the water tested. You can either work out an arrangement with the local health department or an engineering firm, or you can get a test kit that you can use yourself. Especially it's important to make sure that you don't have contamination in your water supply that would cause problems in your health.